Hey guys, hope you're all having a great day. So today I'm going to be planting some bulbs that I ordered online. They're from a company called Colorblends, which is a wholesale bulb ordering website, whatever you want to call them. But anybody can order them, even if you're, just residential like me. You can order however many bulbs you want. There's just minimums on how many you need to order. I'm going to link their website down below. So I have 100 tulips and then 100 daffodils that I'm going to be planting. I'm at my dad's right now. I'm going to be planting actually all of the daffodils here in one particular bed, and then I'm going to plant the 100 tulips at my mom's. And that's why if you see down here, there's only one bag. That's because I just have the daffodils here and I have the tulips there, which you will see later on in this video. But I figured I would take the time to just show you guys how I'm going to be planting these bulbs, what I'm going to be using to put them in the ground, and then just some general, tips and tricks for how to have the best success with bulbs. So to begin, I just wanted to show you what it is that I'm actually going to be using when planting these bulbs, because it's not just the bulbs that are going to be going into the ground. So I have 100 of these daffodil bulbs. This is a variety called, I think it's Bella Estrella or Bella Estrella, however you want to pronounce it. They're a really beautiful daffodil. I'm very excited to see those in the springtime. And there's two things that are going to be going in the hole with it. First of all is actually this product called Repels All. I've talked about this in a number of other videos. I'll try to find a link that I can put down below as well. This is how you're going to prevent things like squirrels, chipmunks, whatever else might eventually attack those bulbs while they're in the ground. Last year, I made a video, I guess I'll link that down below as well if you want to see. That video, I showed you sprinkling this on the top of the bulbs right before they were about to, or as they're starting to emerge in the springtime, which is absolutely a great idea to do. However, I looked more into this, and it actually says on the packaging here that you can put this in the ground when you actually plant your bulbs. So I'm going to be doing that today as I put them in the ground. I have a pretty large container here. I don't know if this will be enough for all the bulbs that I'm doing, but if I run out, I can always head to the garden center and grab some more of this. But you just kind of want to sprinkle a little bit in each hole, and I'll show you how I actually do that when I am planting those bulbs. So this is going to be a great preventative, so that way nothing is eating the bulbs. It's never 100% guaranteed, but it's certainly going to help. The other thing, I have this little red container here. What's in this container is actually just this bag of bulb tone down here. It's an organic fertilizer that's specifically meant for bulbs, and you're meant to put that in the ground when you plant the bulbs. The bulbs really aren't going to use too much of that fertilizer right now. They will be rooting in. It's about mid-October right now, so they will root in, but it's not going to be until the springtime when we actually do start to see growth on those bulbs. But this fertilizer is going to be there, so that way they could put on an even better show than if they didn't have fertilizer. And then what I'm going to be using to actually put them in the ground, you don't really need this if you're only going to get like a small, maybe 25 pack of bulbs or something like that. But because I'm doing a pretty significant amount, I am going to be using a cordless drill and an auger. This drill, this is just one of my dad's drills. It's a DC 970 from DeWalt. I've used this before and it seems to work pretty well. I think it can handle digging in. And also where I live in New England, we have very rocky soil. The areas that I'm going to be planting it in shouldn't be too bad because we have filled it up with screened loam and compost and all that good stuff. So it shouldn't be too much of an issue. But this seems to work fine. You can always use more powerful drills if you want. And now I also have these two auger bits. I want to say one of them is a 3-inch and one of them is a 4-inch. I don't take my word for it. I don't have the packaging for them anymore. But the larger one I'm probably going to end up using for the daffodils, and the smaller one I'll use for the tulips because the daffodils tend to have larger bulbs. But I have these two augers, and I'm just going to drill a hole right in the ground. I'll talk more about planting depth once I take a look at these tags, and I'll tell you the difference between those daffodils and tulip, but every bulb is a little bit different. The only other thing I really wanted to go over is just some general care tips before I actually plant these, just so that way you guys are aware when you're planting your own bulbs, how to care for them pretty much from ordering them until they're done in the summertime. So when you do order your bulbs, when I ordered them through Colorblends, they have a really great option where you can either choose a specific week that you want them shipped, if you're not going to have them shipped ASAP, but they also have the option where you can have them ship when it's time to plant, and that's what I did with these bulbs. So I ordered them back in maybe the end of August, beginning of September, and it's now the middle of October, and they just shipped to me this week. So instead of me having any guesswork about when I wanted to plant these bulbs and when the best time was, they shipped it to me, and as soon as I knew that they were going to come in the mail, I had to get right on planting them in the ground. Not every place that you order from could potentially have that option. But you can always do a quick Google search just to search, what state you're in or what area you're in and when the best time is to plant bulbs. Honestly, it seems like around where the first frost is typically a good time to plant the bulbs, because our usual first frost is October 15th. Don't take my word for that though, because I haven't done a whole lot of research. But at least if you live in my area in southern New England, around October, I would say, is a really great time to plant these bulbs. The best thing to do when you do get your bulbs in the mail, or even if you get them at the store, is plant them as soon as you possibly can. I know it said right on the box for these bulbs to open the box up and get them, into good ventilation and then get them in the ground as soon as possible. But if you're not able to do that, then just store them in a cool, dry place. Usually a garage or a shed is a good place, as long as the shed is waterproof and there's no animals that can get to them, because that has happened in the past with other things that I've stored in a shed. So just keep that in mind. And try to keep it in between 35 and about 65 or 75 degrees. Definitely no warmer than 75, but try to keep them above freezing while they're not in the ground. I've got my notes here just to make sure I keep everything in order. But the next thing is going to be where you want to plant these bulbs. So pretty much all bulbs are going to want full sunlight, and the main reason is so that way they can photosynthesize and gain enough energy so they can flower the next year after you plant them. The only real two things that you don't need to actually put in full sun are leucojums, and I hope I'm saying this right, but Camasias or Camasias. Those two types of plants, they leaf out really early, and you are able to put them under a deciduous tree because they can typically gain all the energy and photosynthesize as much as they need to before the trees tend to leaf out. But pretty much for everything else, try to give them as much sun as possible. The other really important thing is make sure that they have proper drainage. Try not to put them in a spot that's going to be really low to the ground where water is going to pool, because they could potentially rot. Especially over the winter, if you live in an area like I live where we get a lot of snow and rain and it's typically pretty wet in the winter time here, if they don't have proper drainage, then they certainly could rot. When you are planting your bulbs, there's two things to keep in mind. The most important thing is going to be the depth of planting. Every type of bulb is going to be different. Some things that are really small bulbs, you might only need to put an inch or two in the ground, and some things like the daffodils, which tend to be larger bulbs, you're going to want to put a lot deeper in the ground. Same thing with the big allium bulbs, those are going to need to go nice and deep in the ground. So it's kind of going to change for each type of bulb that you're putting in, but when you do order the bulbs or get them from a store, it should tell you the depth that you should plant them. And the other thing too is just the style of how you want the bulbs to be. Some can be more naturalized looking, some can be more formal looking. For me, I'm gonna go more the natural way, so I'm gonna plant them more so in like small groups. I'm gonna do it in odd numbers, but you can also plant them in a line if you want to. You can just do individual bulbs, whatever it is that you wanna do. So once your bulbs are in the ground, I just wanted to mention this quick tip that Color Blends actually mentioned in their paperwork. It's a really great thing to either save the tags, like this little tag that I have down here. It's a great idea to save the tag so you know what you planted for the next year. Or even if you don't want to keep the paper, then you could just take a picture of it on your phone, and then you can have that just to reference for the springtime. Especially if you're not sure when things are going to pop up. Some things could be a really late spring bloomer, and if you don't see them and it's mid-April, beginning of May, and you're not seeing anything, then you can at least know why they haven't popped up yet. The other thing, once you're done planting, the day that you are planting, just make sure that they're going to be consistently moist. Even though they're not actively growing right now, they do need to stay consistently moist. We've had a lot of rain over the last couple of days, so all the soil is still very moist, so I really don't need to water these bulbs in when I plant them today. And generally in my area, it does tend to stay pretty wet, so you don't really have to worry too much, at least in southern New England, for keeping these too moist. But if you happen to live in a drier area, especially if you don't get a lot of rain or snow throughout the winter, just make sure every week or two just to go outside, check the soil. If it feels extremely dry, then just give them a light soaking. But just keep in mind too that in the wintertime, it's not nearly as warm. So when you do water stuff in, it tends to dry out not as fast. So just make sure you're not overwatering as well. The next thing I wanted to mention is just about kind of another planting tip, but when you are picking out different varieties, I guess this kind of goes with ordering as well, different bulbs bloom at different times. If you want to have the longest show of blooms in the springtime, then you can order different varieties where some might pop up in early spring, like a crocus or hyacinth tend to bloom a little bit earlier in the season. Some you can do kind of mid-spring. A lot of tulips tend to bloom mid-spring, and then some are going to be later in the spring, and that's when you get some of your alliums and all that kind of stuff. If you plant them all together in the same area, then you're going to get blooms from early spring to almost summertime. I'm not necessarily doing that today. I just wanted to go nice and simple and have one variety of tulip and one variety of daffodil just to get myself started, because we really don't have any other bulbs in the ground here. But if you're really going to plan for it and want to order a bunch of different varieties, that's just a great thing to keep in mind. And then after they bloom, the most important thing is it's always good to deadhead the flowers if you're able to. If you're planting a ton of blooms, it might be a lot of work for you, but it's just one thing to know when you are planting bulbs. That's going to give them more energy. And then keep the leaves. That's the biggest thing a lot of people make the mistake of doing, is cutting back the plant all the way as soon as they're done blooming. But they grow just like any other plant. They need to store energy for the next season. And they're not going to bloom, or not going to bloom nearly as well for you if you don't keep the foliage as long as it needs to be. If you don't want to do that and you do want to cut it back, then you're just going to have to know to treat them as an annual, and there's a low chance they're going to come back in the next season. But if you do keep them, and that's what I'm planning on doing, so you can keep an eye out for when I make some other videos about that next spring and into the summer. But usually late spring, early summer is when they're kind of done for the season. You'll notice that the leaves are going to start to turn yellow and eventually brown. So at that point, once you can tell they're not really trying to produce any more energy, that's when you can cut them back for the season. And then just keep in mind that you have bulbs there so you don't accidentally dig them up. Okay, so now that I have all of that information out of the way, we can get to planting. I'm going to show you the area that I'm going to be planting these daffodils in, show you the process for the beginning portion of it, and then we'll get going. So this is the bed that we're going to be working with today. It's pretty full so far, and bulbs are usually the last thing you want to put in. So I'm just going to be working in between these plants, and this is the first grouping that I have right here. So you can see that I have 7 bulbs here, and what's awesome about color blends is they give you nice full bulbs that sometimes come in groups of 3, but to their eyes that actually only counts as 1 bulb. So I've got a grouping of 7 there, and I'll just do natural groupings throughout spaces as I can find them. So these are the bulbs that I have right here, and this is the information that Color Blends gives you. The color is white with yellow. The bloom time is early to mid, so it'll be earlier on in the springtime. They get 14 to 16 inches tall, and then I'm going to plant these about 3 inches apart and about 4 inches deep. So I'll try to dig 4-inch deep holes, and I would say that these are generally about 3 inches apart. I'd rather go a little close than a little too far, so that way it has more of a tight grouping of them and I get like a large cluster of blooms. But I'm just going to use the auger to dig the holes with. Just be very careful if you use your own auger, because this area over here, when you are tightening it and putting it on, you could potentially, go like this when it's on, and it could scratch your finger. That has happened to my dad, so you can get some pretty nasty cuts from these. So I have this. Once I dig the holes, I'm going to put the repels all in. I'm just going to shake a little bit in for each one, and then this is the bulb tone that I have. So these 2 products are going to go in the holes, and then I'll put the daffodils right in. So it seems like when I do aug the holes really close together, it may be easier to just kind of have one large area excavated if I'm doing them in larger groups like this. And that soil was a little dry, so it didn't hold together as well. But nonetheless, I still got them in the hole. I put everything in there. So I'm just going to lay out the rest of the bulbs first so I can get an idea for where these different groupings are going to be. And then I'm just going to repeat the process from there. Okay, so all of the bulbs are in the ground at my dad's, so I just want to quickly tell you where I kind of planted them and then what my thought process was. So throughout the beds, I just did little groupings of them. Some are in groups of 5, some are groups of 7, some are groups of 9, some were a few more, but I just kind of did that in the open spaces that I had in these areas. So by next spring, and again, these are going to bloom early to mid-spring, this will be filled with lots of daffodils. Okay, so it is actually a new morning now. I'm at my mom's house and I'm going to be planting the tulips. So let's take a look at what variety I have. So this variety that I have is called Pink Cubed. There's 100 of these bulbs. Their bloom time is going to be early, mid to late. So they actually bloom for quite a decent amount of time for tulips, which is great since this is the only thing that I'm actually planting here. We do have some other tulips planted in the yard, but there's not many compared to these. Their height is going to be 16 to 25 inches, so kind of tall for a tulip. And then again, 3 inches apart, same thing as the daffodils, but these actually need to go 5 inches deep. So I'm just going to try to plant them a little bit deeper in the ground. I think my plan for attack for these is I'm going to plant them mostly in the front of our house, but they're going to be more spread out than how they were at my dad's. Instead of them just being in one bed, I'm going to spread them throughout because we don't have as much space available in the beds that we have planted around here. And I might throw a few in the back too because we do look outside at the weeping birch tree in the backyard, so I think I'm going to put a few more there. But nonetheless, let's get started. Okay, so all the bulbs are in the ground. Also, I just wanted to mention how beautiful this tree is that's behind me. Just a really great thing about fall. But anyways, all the bulbs are in the ground. They're planted, they're fertilized. I didn't really have too much of an issue planting any of them. The only ones I really had an issue was by those pink coneflowers that were in the front yard and also with the butterfly bushes. It's only because that is a brand new bed that I just put in maybe a month ago or so, and I did the method where I put a layer of cardboard and then compost on top of it, so nothing is really broke down yet all that much. So it's kind of hard to dig those holes, plus the first battery I used died at that time too, and I was like, why is it so hard to dig these holes? But then I realized I just had to replace the battery. But besides that, everything else went pretty smoothly. The biggest thing is I just wanted to make sure I got those deep enough in the ground. I feel like that's a mistake I've made in the past, is not planting them deep enough. But I think everything's pretty good for the most part. So stay tuned for an update on these bulbs. Probably sometime around like the beginning of May, I want to say, either late April, beginning of May. I'm probably going to create some sort of update to this video when these actually are in their bloom. I'm going to try to time it so that way I can show you guys what all the daffodils look like when they're in their peak bloom, and then when all the tulips are in their peak bloom. So we will see. Besides that, if you guys have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section down below, and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Besides that, I hope you guys like this video, and I will see you in the next one.